Okay, good afternoon, colleagues from whichever location or geographical location you're tuned in from. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We have a very exciting afternoon ahead of us. We are all familiar with what the digital era has, how it has transformed the way we live our lives, the way we relate with each other. And this afternoon, we are going to consider how this digital space is impacting or proposing to impact how we conduct research. From the traditional way which we are all familiar with, to what is being proposed going forward with the use of these disruptive technologies that are here with us. So this afternoon, we have two eminent researchers and experts in their spaces to speak to us on the ethical and legal aspects of open science, as opposed to the traditional way that we have always conducted research. Our first speaker, I think, is very familiar to most of us in the health space, Professor Walter Jaoko from the University of Nairobi. Professor Jaoko is a professor of medical microbiology and immunology at the University of Nairobi. He also is a bioethicist. And in this, with regard to what he's going to talk to us this afternoon, I'm emphasizing on his skill and expertise in bioethics. Professor Jaoko is not only the co-chair of the Strathmore Ethics Committee, he's also a member of the WHO Research Ethics Committee. He has served in that position for a number of years. He is well-renowned in research, and he will talk to us about the ethical issues related to open science. Welcome, Prof. Jaoko.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Amayo. I'm really glad to be here. I would like to share my screen. Oh, okay, it is there now. Okay, I hope you can all see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So how much time do I have, Prof?
You have 30 minutes, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so today we're going to look at the ethical issues in open science. And the way I thought it would be useful is to not assume that everybody understands what open science is. And so I'll start by discussing what open science is and what are the implications before I dive into the ethical issues around it. And then I'll use a case study just to try and bring out some of those ethical issues. So what is open science? Now, it is the global movement to make scientific knowledge openly accessible, transparent, and reusable for everyone. The concept of open science is that science should not be accessible just to a few people, but science should also be very transparent so that anybody who has any questions about it can be able to do their own analysis and hopefully come to the same conclusion, and that knowledge should be reusable. And for everyone here, extends it just beyond the scientific community into communities as well, and lay people. Now, open science emphasizes sharing research, results, data, methods, and tools freely so that science benefits society more equitably. I think many times we appreciate the idea of sharing results openly, and that is how we have come with the concept of open access journals so that people do not have to pay for it. But we forget that open science also has a component where data is supposed to be shared freely. The methods that we use in research should be shared freely, and the tools we use should also be shared freely. So the open science, when it comes to data, we apply something that is called FAIR. And FAIR here is just an acronym for certain things. One, that data should be findable. And that has been before. Data, published data, people could access it. But there's an argument that some data might not be findable because many journals charge a fee to access that data. And especially for people coming from resource-limited settings, might not find it. So it is not findable. The concept of open science is that we should make that data easily available to anybody, and that it should be accessible. It should be what they describe as interoperable, and it should be reusable. Interoperable is that when that data can be, operationalized in whichever setting. And then finally, open science data has to be ethical, and that's why we're going to look at some of the issues. The key pillars of open science is open access. So this comes to things like scientific publication data sets. For example, nowadays, there are journals, when you're submitting your article for publication, they also require that you submit your raw data so that anybody else can be able to analyze it using the methods you said you used and come to the same results. Then open data and software, the idea of raw data, as I've talked about, if you've used any coding, it has to be made available, data analytical tools that you used, and so on. Then there is open infrastructure, the platforms and repositories that support collaborations and knowledge sharing should be open to all. Open engagement, I've already talked about that. The idea is the public and policy makers should also have access to this science. And then transparency in terms of methods, observations, and the results that we generate. So these are the key areas. And in 2021, 194 countries adopted the UNESCO recommendation on open science. And this was the first global framework of its kind. So more and more countries are acknowledging the importance of making science open. And with that initiative that UNESCO started in 2021, the numbers are increasing. But what are the implications of open science? One is accessibility. We can access publications, we can access data, the software, educational resources can be made freely available to the public. It also encourages transparency. So in the methods that we use, the data collection tools that we use, the analytical methods and software that we use should really be documented, and it should be able to allow other people to verify and to build on the results that we find. Open science also hopefully encourages cooperation across borders, across disciplines, and even between professionals and lay people, the citizens, so that science is not mysterious. Then open science also has this issue of equity, and that was actually what drove it, the idea of inclusivity, that researchers from resource-limited countries and researchers from the high-income countries have equal access to the benefits of science. So hopefully, open science will build more partnership. That is one of the objectives. And collaboration, the idea that when science is open, researchers from resource-limited countries, high-income countries, have something that they can bring on the table and improve scientific quality. But then there are ethical issues in open science, and these are the things that we'd want to look at today. The first one is informed consent. Now, informed consent is domiciled on the ethical principles of respect for other people. And I'm using this illustration of the Japanese who, in demonstrating respect, they bow. And the lower you bow, the more respectful you are. The idea that research participants need to be respected. And one of the key elements of showing respect to research participants is by getting the informed consent. Now, participants in studies must give informed consent for their data to be shared openly. Now, this is a new concept. Many times, when we are taking consent from research participants, we let them know that the information will be kept confidential, that nobody will have access to that information except the study team and the regulatory bodies, so ethics review committees and regulators if it is a clinical trial. But this concept of open science, we should also include, if we are going to be involved in open science, we should also include that information that the data that we collect from study participants will be shared openly, but anonymized, so that their individual information will not be shared. So how can this be put in an informed consent form for participants to understand? Because the traditional research that we do, guaranteeing research participants that the information will be kept confidential is very comforting. The language that you use when you tell them now that the information they provide will be known by everybody can be a challenge. And so it has to be put in a language that will help the research participants to appreciate that the information they have given is so valuable, it should not be left unshared, but that every measure will be put into place that the individual contribution will not be identified. Now, so therefore, there are ethical concerns when data is, particularly when data is reused beyond the scope originally agreed upon. Because in open science, the idea is that this data is so valuable that if it can help resolve another research question, it should be accessible openly. So that is something that we need to help our research participants to understand. The other area of ethical concern in open science is data privacy. Now, in the past, we had this issue of when you do research, who owns the data? And this is a cartoon illustrating the ivory tower of science. They're thinking that researchers could claim to own data that has been sourced from research participants. The idea of open science is that there is no data ownership as such, but that we are all stewards of data. So when you own something, it's different from when you do not own it, but you're just a steward. And you're a steward for who? You're a steward for the universal body of humanity. That this information that you have, you are only steering it, not owning it, because it is the community, the society that actually owns it, but you have been given the responsibility to be a steward for it. So you're just a steward you're just a steward in this ownership, but you actually don't own it. And that is the whole essence. So these issues of the past of people, there would be a fight as to who actually owns the data. The idea of open science is to try and remove that concept of ownership to concept of stewardship. Now, sharing research data openly has higher risks of exposing sensitive personal information, especially issues like medical records or genetics or social science studies where you're measuring behaviors and all that. So it makes it a bit easier to breach that data privacy. And so it's something that some people need to be conscious of. Researchers must balance openness with confidentiality obligations to participants. In data science, you're not giving researchers obligation to breach research participants' confidentiality. But so researchers just need to note that there is a risk and make every effort to ensure that there is data privacy. The other ethical concern is the issues of intellectual property and ownership of anything that has been found out of it, not the data, but the information that you've generated, the new findings that you've generated, whether it is patented or it's copyrighted. Open science goes against these traditional norms of patents, copyrights, and licensing, and we just need to be careful that we do not breach intellectual property. So therefore, it creates a tension between protecting researchers' rights and ensuring free access to knowledge. There's researchers' rights to patencies, copyrights, licensing, and all that. And that also touches on some legal aspects that my co-presenters will be able to address. So this is what people fear, that you can have a new invention, but because of the nature of open science, sharing your raw data, making all these things easily accessible to other people, people can use that information that at the end you actually don't know who was the inventor of the research that you have come up with. So somebody comes here with a cartoon and says, oh, here's my new invention. But somebody else says, oh, it looks like mine. You don't know now who came up with that invention before. But not only that, there is a third person who can also come up and has exactly the same invention. So this is an area of concern, but there are ways and means of addressing it. The other concern is the issue of equity and inclusion. Now, it's a bit of a dichotomy in the sense that richer institutions can benefit more from open resources than poor ones, and thereby creating an imbalance as to who can use and apply open science. Remember when we started, that was one of the objectives of open science, the idea that you put all this information out there so that it is easily acceptable to everyone. But then the reality is that for you to access that information that is out there, and for you to use that information that is out there, sometimes it requires you to have certain instruments, certain softwares that institutions from resource-limited countries might not be able to access. And so what does that mean? It therefore means that although you've put all this information out there, the people who can best tap that information would be the richer institution. And in so doing, it could be reinforcing global inequities, inequalities, whereby institutions from the West, and I'm going to show that with the illustration I'm going to give at the end, where certain institutions are able to better utilize that open science information than others. And so this is a cartoon that we've seen often that is used to depict the issues of equity and equality. If you look at the cartoon on the left, is that all these three people want to watch a cricket match. And the equality here is that each of them has been given a stool. So in terms of equality, they're all equal. But the person on the right can still not watch the match because he needs more than one stool. So although they're equal, he is disadvantaged. Now, equity says that the person on the left does not actually require a stool. He already can be able to access and watch the cricket match. But the person on the right needs two stools. So he surrenders his tool. So now there is equity. All the three of them can be able to watch the match. The reality on the ground, and this is what Open Science is trying to resolve, is that people from the high-income countries, researchers, institutions, they have more than one tool. They are very privileged. They have top-of-the-range equipment for analyzing data. They have top-of-the-range equipment for doing laboratory tests and so on. So this, the reality is what we are trying to resolve by Open Science, and not provide equality, but equity, so that everybody can be able to participate in research. The other ethical issue is quality and reliability. What does that mean? In open science platforms, you share information very openly, and sometimes there is also the risk of sharing premature information. And again, I'm going to illustrate it with the case study, where you can share unverified results, and thereby there is a risk of spreading misinformation. The ethical practice, therefore, needs maintaining rigorous peer review and reproducibility of the standards. The fact that we are going open science does not mean that we lose our safeguards for maintaining scientific rigor. Now, I want to end with examples, and I'm going to pick on this COVID-19 case and try to use it to illustrate some of the ethical challenges that I've already highlighted with open science. Now, open science in COVID-19 was crucial. If you remember, when we were fighting the pandemic, we needed to share the information rapidly so that nations could make quick decisions on how to mitigate against the spread of COVID-19. But it raised serious ethical issues around privacy, around issues of consent, the issues of equity, and data misuse. The problem of data that had been churned out there, but had actually not been thoroughly peer-reviewed. So we look at each of these individually. So if you look at privacy and confidentiality, now the idea of privacy and confidentiality is that the information that you have is kept private and confidential. It's kept under lock and key. But what happened in COVID-19? So in COVID-19, the data sets often included health records, genetic data, and even location tracking. I don't know how many of you were very keen in reading scientific articles during that period. I still remember a study that was done in New York that were tracking individuals using their mobile phone data, and they could show that the places where the traffic was heaviest was where the COVID pandemic was worst. And the people who were being tracked were not even aware. You know, you've registered with a mobile service provider, like for example, in Kenya, you're with Safaricom. So you can imagine somebody doing a study during the pandemic and tracking your movements of all these phones. And you can see that the places, so for example, this is just an example. If I'm able to track all the phone users in Nairobi, and then on Friday I can see them, 90% of them are going to Kitengela, for example, and then the rest are distributed in other parts. And then I suddenly show that Kitengela has the highest incidence of COVID-19. Now that is useful information because it shows us, remember, we're using the issues of lockdown to curb the spread of COVID-19. So that's a useful thing. You know that movement of people is associated with a spread of COVID-19. But the owners of those phones have not given you consent for you to track them. They are not even aware that you are tracking them. And so that's a breach of their confidentiality. Then sharing openly also risks exposing individual identities. Like in that example that I've given, if there is somebody who is cheeky, yeah, who knows my number and wants to track my movement, it exposes me because they've used my number, they know my movement, they know on Friday I was in Kitengela, okay? That is information should not be public to, it should not be, it's not anybody else's business to know my movement. So there is an exposure, there's a risk of exposing individuals' identities and personal information. And then during COVID-19 also, a lot of anonymized data were being combined with data sets from other populations. So for you to combine data sets, so if I'm combining data sets from Nairobi and I'm combining it to give a Kenyan picture during COVID-19, I would combine data sets, my data set with somebody's data sets in Eldoret, somebody's data sets in Mombasa, for us to make a national data set. And for us to do that, I need to know the columns that I'm using to merge this data. So it was so sometimes you need to re-identify the data so that it will help you to merge this data. But remember, the research participants that you recruited, you told them you're not going to use any of their information for them to be identified. But this is a situation where you need to re-identify the data to merge the data set so that you can produce a global or a national picture. So those were issues around consent with regard to COVID-19 studies. The other issues was with regard to privacy and confidentiality during COVID-19 studies. The other issue was consent and autonomy. Now, many patients did not explicitly consent to their data being shared globally. But because this was a global pandemic, there was value in obtaining a global information. So in a sense, there was a breach in some situations, and I'm not saying all cases, but in some situations, there was a breach of informed consent. Then there also concerns arose when data was reused beyond the original purpose for the pandemic response. So here was an emergency where people were collecting data with the participants understanding that it was being used to control or to mitigate against the COVID-19 pandemic. But in the event, there are some cases where data was collected and was used for reasons beyond COVID-19. Then data was not shared equitably. The rich nations had faster access to critical information than the resource-limited countries. What about the issue of equity and inclusion? Now, wealthy nations with advanced tools benefited more than underfunded ones in low-income countries. So if you look at the way data was being processed, there are institutions that have the capacity for dealing with big data. So big data science requires very sophisticated tools, very sophisticated machineries to be able to make sense out of this big data. Now, I can assure you in Africa, there are very few institutions that would be able to handle that large quantities of data. So the equity that we were talking about earlier, which is an objective of open science, in fact ended up being the opposite, where wealthy institutions had more access to this data, could use this data more than resource-limited countries. And therefore, it created what had been termed as a data colonialism, where there are communities contributing data. So you have this global community, so they have all this data, transmission, mortality rates in different parts of the world, but not everybody can benefit from analyzing that data. So it created a data colonialism. There was no equitable response, and we can use the example of Omicron. If you can remember, those who remember who closely monitored the COVID-19 response, when Omicron, a new variant, was first discovered in South Africa, The local scientists, in the principle of open science, shared the data quickly. And immediately, countries faced travel bans with economic losses to South Africa. They told people not to go to South Africa. There's an Omicron that is there. They're at risk of getting that Omicron and so on. And here was a situation where openness did not translate to fairness. If you ask yourself, there are other variants that were discovered in other countries first, but you never had travel restrictions to go to these countries where these variants were discovered. So here is a situation where open science, openness, quick sharing of data was used negatively against a resource-limited country like South Africa compared to what other countries were experiencing. So this is what happened. You have Omicron, we were shutting you down. You stay out there, we don't want to come to your country. But that did not happen in other countries. So this is a situation, and this was because of the quick response to this new information that the researchers found in South Africa, and they shared it in the principle of open science. The other one was quality and reliability. Now, as I've already mentioned, there's a rush to share COVID-19 data with the whole idea was to help a quick response to the pandemic. And as a result, there are some incomplete data that was shared. There are some inconsistent data sets that were shared in a hurry. And this premature sharing of unverified results sometimes fueled misinformation, thus undermining public trust. And I'll just give you an example of this. So COVID-19, during COVID-19, there are several preprints. I don't know if some of you had access to them, where it would go into a peer-reviewed journal, but then they would tell you that this article has not been peer-reviewed. Okay, so it was you to know that that article has not gone through the rigor. Later on, it would go through the rigor and then it would be published, and now they would say it has been peer-reviewed. However, some of the articles that were submitted were either later rejected or were retracted due to several reasons: methodological flaws, there were issues with data, there were some ethical concerns, and so on. Just to give you an example, this is where, remember during that time, there was all these battles of, does hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, are they useful in treating COVID? And the people who are not familiar with science would pick an article that has been published, not peer-reviewed, but already published, because they're called preprints, and use those articles to push their agenda. So you'd hear people saying, oh, hydroxychloroquine is all you need. You don't need anything else. Or there is a treatment for this COVID-19, and so on and so forth. And then somebody would also push an agenda of ivermectin. And look at an article that has been sent as a preprint that somebody argued that ivermectin was useful in treating COVID-19, and so on. And it created a lot of confusion during that time. So the people were saying, oh, it's the people who have vaccines who are trying to sell the vaccine agenda. They don't want COVID-19 to be treated, just because of this false information that we got from preprint. Actually, there is an article that was published in June this year that looked at this issue, how COVID-19 affected academic publishing. A 3-year study of 17 million research papers. And it highlights some of the papers that ended up not being published because of the errors that they had, but they had already been read by people through preprints in the concept of open science. So this is just to show you that there are certain dangers that we need to be aware of when it comes to matters open science. So in summary, we've defined what open science is. We've looked at the implications of open science. We have looked at ethical issues around open science. And we've ended by looking at COVID-19 response as a case study of some of the risks and ethical issues that are associated with open science. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Prof. Jaoko. We will look at the questions in the Q&A. We will respond to all the questions after the second presentation. It's my pleasure now to introduce the second speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Constance Gikonyo, who is an advocate of the Kenya High Court. She's a senior lecturer at the University of Nairobi School of Law and a researcher in her own right. She is also a member of the Kenyatta National Hospital, University of Nairobi Ethics and Research Committee. And Constance's research interests span various legal areas, and she is actually our lead technical person in issues of where the ethical legal interface occurs at the KNHUN ERC. It's therefore my great pleasure to invite Dr. Gikonyo to take us through now the legal aspects of open science. Welcome, Constance.
Thank you very much, Prof. Amayo, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Prof. Jaoko. You have indeed, I can straight away launch into discussing the legal aspects, because you have clearly informed us. Let me share my screen. And I need to share from technology there. So you have ably told us what open science is. It's trying to make scientific research open and accessible. And this is scientific research from all fields to be accessible to everyone for the benefit of the scientists as well as society as a whole. But as you have clearly brought out, that there are ethical challenges when it comes to this. To further illustrate this ethical challenge, which is also linked to legal challenges, there's a story. And I'm sure Prof. Jaoko knows about it, knows about this particular case, as well as some of you on this platform. And that is the case of Henrietta Lacks, the HeLa cell case. Now, this was a lady who died or passed on in 1951 at the Johns Hopkins Hospital of cervical cancer. Now, before she died, and without her consent or authorization, she was never told about it, samples of her tumors were collected. Now, after this collection, the scientists then proceeded to develop the first immortalized human cells line. So therefore, it meant that these cells could be reproduced indefinitely under laboratory conditions. And once that was possible, it means that these cells could be used later on by different scientists. And in this particular case, it is actually documented that indeed the HeLa cells have been used in developing the polio vaccine, cancer treatments, HPV vaccine, mapping the human genome. They have been used for studies in HIV and AIDS. They have also been used in studies to do with in vitro fertilization. Now, all this time, her family never really knew that this was happening until they later on found out. And what even made the case more prominent was somebody who used her cells wrongly. A group of a company used her cells wrongly. And by then, her family now had come to learn that her cells were the ones that were being used openly for research. So the family actually filed a suit, and that is where they actually had to come and sit together with the relevant authorities. I can't remember which body it was, and they made an agreement. They entered into an agreement that yes, her cells could continue to be used for research. However, they could not be used willy-nilly by anyone and everyone. There had to be a process, and where necessary, the family should be involved and the appropriate compensation paid. So this is one woman, and interestingly, by the way, was a Black, for years since her death, has continued to help humanity. To me, that is an aspect of open science, because her cells have ended up helping us in so many other ways to progress science. But the question is, some of the ethical issues that Prof. Jaoko has spoken about. For one, she did not consent. Neither did her family members. They were not informed about this for a very long period of time before they came to learn of it. So there were clearly ethical issues in that particular case. And so tied to the ethical issues that have just been discussed, you have legal issues. And one key aspect of these legal issues is it is framed or surrounded by the issue of data. Actually, now, one of the greatest assets or commodities you can have is data. Why? Why do these social media platforms, why are they very happy to have you on board, to join them? They want you to join because, and this we are talking of the Facebooks, the Instagram, all of those, TikTok, etc. They harvest data from you. This data, they can then sell to others who need it. And that's how they make their money. But the question is, did you give consent? Did you permit for your data to be used? So around this issue of open science is surrounded by the issue of data privacy, confidentiality. And now we are more alive to it. It is not when previously we did not know. Now we are more alert that my data belongs to me and I should give consent. And that is why we say that in research, you must give informed consent. Not just any type of consent, but informed consent to collect data from someone. So the ethical issue, as has been pointed out, is that open science encourages the sharing of research data. And this could be personal, sensitive information or data that can easily identify a person. Now, that could potentially lead to the legal issue. And the legal issue is violation of privacy. Specifically, under our Kenyan law, right? And I go to the primary one, that is the Constitution. We have Article 31 under the Bill of Rights. Now, Article 31 under the Bill of Rights provides that every person is entitled to privacy. That means not to have their person, home or property searched, B, their possession seized, C, and what is relevant in this particular context, information relating to their family or private affairs unnecessarily required or revealed, and D, the privacy of their communications should not be infringed. So therefore, as we seek to encourage and carry forward open science, we cannot do it blindly. We must do it within the legal confines that we have. And the legal confines for us in Kenya is the Constitution, and we also have the Kenya Data Protection Act. And even depending on the kind of research you have, if it is global, you must ensure that you are abiding by the relevant global regulations. For example, if you are dealing with the European Union, any country in the European Union, you must abide with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which actually currently is considered, should I say, the benchmark for data protection regulations world over. Many countries are aligning their data protection law with the GDPR. And for example, as provided in the GDPR and even in Kenya's data protection, if you are therefore going to deal with private information or data, personal or sensitive, personal information under the Data Protection Act of Kenya is information that reveals somebody's gender, their name, basic information about a person. it becomes sensitive information if it is information that could potentially lead to that person being discriminated against. For example, information that reveals their ethnicity, information that reveals their marital status, information that reveals their religious affiliations, etc., or medical information, information that reveals maybe they have a particular condition, etc., that is sensitive. And therefore, it means if you are dealing with sensitive data, then even higher levels of protection are provided for under the Data Protection Act that you must abide by. But that is not to say that the personal data still does not have safeguards. There are safeguards. For example, for both, you must get consent. So therefore, if you are dealing with data subjects, informed consent is now mandatory in Kenya as per the law, right? And essentially what we can say is this: openness cannot override the right to privacy. That is simple. So in as much as we are working towards open science, we must ensure we do it while protecting someone's privacy. The other issue is the issue of informed consent and secondary data use. So there was informed consent when this data was collected for the initial research. But then you therefore, that data thereafter is made public for reuse by other people. The question is, did you give consent for the secondary use of the data? And that is where now, as the primary researcher, the one who collects the informed consent, you have an obligation to inform this research participant that this research is part of open science. So therefore, this data will be made publicly available, even if it will be anonymized. That is, it will not reveal who you are, and therefore it could be potentially used for further research. Do you consent or not? That should be part of the informed consent. So that if the person says yes, well and good, then that data can later on be used. If they say no, then they have not given consent for secondary use of their data. So that would be something of importance. And that is where even ethic review committees become relevant, because even the issue of data management plans, reviewing whether the research has provided a data management plan, is relevant. How will this data be stored? Will the data be made public? Where will it be stored, right? Will it be properly be anonymized, etc.? The third aspect, the third legal issue is intellectual property rights. And this, Professor Jauka has also touched on. And the bottom line, I would say that the primary rule is this: at all times, intellectual property must be respected. Even if we are trying to promote open science, we must respect intellectual property. So the ethical issue are who owns the data? Who owns the code, right? But even if you collected the data, you've made it public, copyright laws still apply, and different jurisdictions have the copyright laws. Yeah? If you're the author of a song, you're the author of some written work, say a research report, you own the copyright. So therefore, it means to use that intellectual property rightfully, we must do what the law requires us to do. So for example, licensing requirements. So in the case of open science, for example, when you are putting out your data, your work, you must specify what license do you ascribe to your work. Is it a Creative Commons by agreement license? That means a CC BY means that you are permitting anyone to freely use your data or research, but they must say that you are the source. They must acknowledge you as the owner. So all you're asking for is attribution, that this data set was originally collected by so-and-so, or it belongs to so-and-so. Another example of a license that could be used is the CC-BY-NC. Now, this one means Creative Commons by, meaning you require the person who is going to use, say, your article or data to attribute it to you, but there are further restrictions. They cannot use it for commercial purposes. They can only use it for non-commercial purposes. Okay, and there are a number of these other licenses. So that is important, and that is what we would be required to ensure that we are balancing between open science and ensuring intellectual property protection. We therefore must also look at the university policies. Are they in line with this? Because at times our institutions, even research institutions, not just universities, may not be clear. Because remember, some research institutions, for example, will say that because you used our facilities, you used our time, then you co-share, say, the patent or something. So again, research institutions, universities have to review their IP policies to ensure that they are in line with the law. So ultimately, the tension, how do we balance the public good of making this scientific information available, as well as protecting the proprietary or commercial interests of the authors or the generators of this information? Then there is the issue of research integrity and misuse of data. And here, the legal risks comes, and a very common one is known as p-hacking. The other name is data dredging, data phishing, where somebody, for example, makes their data set freely available. Then somebody picks on that data set and goes and reanalyzes the data and looks for some inconsequential connection in that data and publishes that as a key finding based on that data. Now, that is wrong. That is actually wrong, and it's actually something that is really happening out there. And which therefore means we are engaging in other unethical behavior such as plagiarism, data fabrication, data manipulation, which is wrong. How do we deal with this? It means we go back to the law, and we must ensure that we attribute properly the data. So as institutions, research misconduct regulations should be provided, and we apply them. If somebody is known to have misused data, then something should be done about it. And a very interesting case that you could follow up on, it's available on the internet on this issue, is the case of Francesco Gino. She was, or is it Gino Franceschi? She was a behavioral scientist at the Harvard Business School. It has been a very bad fall from grace for her. The case ended last year towards the end, because at one point she even sued Harvard University. But it was a sad case that involved p-hacking, data fabrication, data plagiarism, and all that. Now, there is also the requirement now, and to ensure that the issue of a proper attribution is done. That is why nowadays we have what are known as DOIs. DOIs are not only provided for journal articles. DOIs are also provided for data sets. What is a DOI? DOI stands for Digital Object Identifier. It is an identification number that is given to a particular data set or an article that is unique to that data set or that article, or even books, okay? It means that once a data set is given a particular DOI, no other data set can have a similar digital object identifier. Think of a DOI simply as this. your student registration number at a university or at an institution. If you have a staff number or a registration number at an institution, no one else can have the same. Other people may have similar names or even identical names to yours, but your staff number or your student number can never be identical to anyone else. That is a DOI. And that is why DOIs now help and make it easier to identify specific data sets and ensure the correct attribution is given. Another, national security and sensitive research. Yes, we are encouraging open science. And the last example of Omicron given by Prof. Jaoko, a clear illustration of what openness in research can lead to. In the case of South Africa, it led to economic losses. Now, there is the legal concern then in terms of specific research that could involve biotechnology, defense, etc. Should we make it public when we consider security or public safety aspects of it? And if you go back even, for example, to our constitution now, leaning back to the law, you realize that there are certain exceptions, even in the law, when it comes to matters of public safety, national security. The same applies when we come to open science, right? Because we must ensure that by making science open, it is not going to be used for harmful purposes. Because somebody could actually pick a data set that has been made public and use it for harmful purpose. Maybe I'm forgetting the case. There's a case where the H1N1, was it the avian virus? Somebody manipulated it and could make it spread among ferrets. I can't clearly remember the case. But clearly that was a case where the data was made open and these people manipulated the data for evil, for wrong, to create something bad. So we must be careful. And that is where, for example, the law now ensures that if any data, for example, is to be moved, there are safeguards, there are guidelines you must follow when exporting or moving that data. Under the Data Protection Act, it's actually a very detailed procedure and requirement that must be undertaken. It means if you're undertaking cross-research between two different institutions, one in Kenya, one in Europe, or anywhere else, you must be careful and ensure it has your research, is it abiding by the data protection requirements because they are, because there is the movement, the cross-border movement of data. And it is actually takes work. For the first thing you must, it's a data impact assessment must be done within 60 days, right? You must say who will store the data. You must show that the original data will still be safeguarded within Kenya, even if you're going to export it. So that is where the law comes in trying to protect. And that ensures also for we as Africans, our data is not just exported out there for the benefit of other people. And our government is sitting pretty, not knowing what our data is going to be used for. Then we have the legal issue of accountability and attribution. Ethical concern is who is responsible if open data is misused or misinterpreted. Again, if that happens, the law comes in, right? And we must clearly, and that is where now, for example, data sharing agreements are must be very clear. You must have an agreement that says, this is how we're going to protect this data. If this and this happens, who will be liable? If, say, a breach is discovered, who will be accountable for it? So we cannot afford now to play around with data as in a laissez-faire affair. We actually have to do it in a very clear and documented manner, right? So even for our simple research, let us assume somebody is doing your postgraduate research. You have to be very careful, lest you found yourself being liable because you collected data, you did not, or you are not accountable for that data. For example, it leaks, it was not properly anonymized, right? So it reveals information about people. You can be held liable, okay? So that puts us again on our toes to ensure that we are doing what the law expects us to do. There is also the requirement that we comply with funders and institutional policies. For those of you who are familiar, especially for the EU, they were the ones who are really, because of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. So for their projects, they will clearly require even a clear data management plan of how you're going to store, what you're going to do with it, etc. That is a requirement. Now, in Kenya too, that has been brought local through the Data Protection Act, as well as NACOSTI and the National Research Fund, NRF. So we must abide by this. Failure to that, some of these funders will either take away the funding, or even if you proceed with the research, they will, the term to use here, they will not acknowledge your research because it has not been done within the confines of what the law provides. And therefore, it also means our research institutions must ensure that their internal policies relevant to data protection and research align with both local, that is domestic legislation, and international legislation. Some of our institutions may not have done that, but they actually now need to ensure that they do that. Because failure to do that, you will be in breach of contract. Remember, most of these funders, you sign an agreement. I know, most people say the agreements are tedious, they're in fine print. Trust me, you know that fine print was not fine print when you're told you're in breach. And you're told, please see clause number 3.3.3. It addresses that matter. And it also therefore means when we sign these funding agreements, please scrutinize it with a fine tooth comb. Do not say it's a bulky document, but scrutinize it with a fine tooth comb so that you abide with what it expects of you. And that is all in terms of the legal aspects relevant to open science. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gikonyo. Thank you very much, Prof. Jaoko. This has been very informative, coming from the both of you. And attendees, please, we are now open to receive questions to the two panelists. And also now, how are we handling the QA? Is it, I'm looking to see.
We should be receiving questions from our attendees via the Q&A section. So to our participants, if you do have a question or comments to our panelists for today, you can put them on the Q&A and we'll be able to retrieve them and answer you. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, attendees. Any questions that you have, please, the panelists are available to respond to them. So I'm eyeballing the QA portion. I'm not seeing questions. Were they too high end, or we are still trying to discover, to understand open science and its implications, both ethical and legal. That's what I'm seeing. I don't know whether people are raising hands or.
Chair, there's a question on the Q&A section already.
Okay, is it am I the one who's not able to see? Okay, can you read it? I'm not able to see.
All right, there are two, I can read them.
Kindly.
The
And
first
then
question,
between the two of you, you'll agree who can respond to it.
yes. The first question is, are there any mechanisms in place to ensure that every publication in the open source space is systematically accompanied by all the required documentation and information you highlighted? Then the other question is, how enforceable are the regulations governing open space? Do we have a robust system that can ensure this is done? And the third question, how can we use open science to improve collaboration across disciplines?
Okay, so Dr. Gikonyo, since you've read, you can pick which one you'll respond to and which one, or Prof. Jaoko will respond to, or you can bring in the legal and Prof. Jaoko, the ethical side to each of those questions. Kindly go ahead.
Right, and the more questions have come in. I think the first easier one is somebody has asked, where can someone access the international data protection policies? The GDPR is accessible if you just click on the EU, the European Union webpage. There should be a link that leads you to their regulations, the EU regulations. And if you actually even just type EU regulations on data protection, you get a link and you can very easily download. They are freely accessible. Now, let me start by the third question. How can we use open science to improve collaboration across disciplines? Already right now, you'll realize that for most of these major funders, there are certain things they require if you're seeking funding from them for a project. One, that project must involve a number of disciplines. I cannot, for example, as a lawyer, pitch a project to the EU for funding, and it is only focusing on the law, and the only people involved in it are lawyers. I can assure you it will not receive funding. However, if you pick a topic that is legal in nature, but you're looking at the law in action, how, say, a particular law is applied in reality, what are its challenges, which therefore means, for example, you're bringing in the anthropological aspects, the economic aspects, so you will need experts from those areas, then you will get funding. And then also now, in most of their projects, they are requiring that you make your findings public. So if it is the data, you make it public that you collect, your findings, either by way of publication of the report or journal articles, that you make them open access. And in so doing, that is helping, open science is helping to improve collaboration across the disciplines. There is how enforceable are the regulations governing open space. These regulations were that Prof. Jaoko spoke about at the beginning, that were developed by UNESCO. Strictly speaking, they are not regulations, they are guidelines. So it is for countries to see how to adopt them. And the only way now they could be adopted to make them legally enforceable is through data protection laws. Okay, but what we have generally under the open science principles is, it is an aspiration, but legally they are not enforceable as the law. That is why we still have to, in most of these issues, there's the ethical side to it, and there is the legal issue, so we must still abide by the law. So allow me to stop there and request Prof. Jaoko to continue.
Yeah, so thanks, Dr. So just to reinforce that, so one of the ways of improving collaboration across disciplines with open science is also the funders, as you rightly said, there are also requirements for people who are publishing in scientific journals that you publish in open source journals. And the idea of open source journals is that more researchers across the globe can be able to access it. because open source journals tend to be much more readable by researchers from this part of the world, because you don't have to pay for anything. The question about mechanisms in place to ensure that every publication is open source is systematically accompanied by all required documents. Again, just like Dr. Ria said, you know, open science is at the moment a recommendation. There's no legal requirement that all the journals will ascribe to the principles of open science. So journals are applying this based on what they consider important for them. So not all the journals do this, but you'll find that for several journals now, when you're submitting your article for consideration for publication, they ask you to also submit your raw data at the same time. Not all journals. That is a way of ensuring open science, that you submit all this brilliant article, but then they also want you to attach your raw data. Now, at the beginning, the researchers were very reluctant, because our thinking has always been that your data is really private. It's really, nobody should be able to have access to it. But the journals also, they pass your data through their data analysts as well. And because your article has indicated what methods you use to analyze your data, they are able to use those same methods to see whether they're coming to the same results that you have. And it gives the journal more confidence in accepting your article for publication. So if you do not submit those raw data, the journal feels that there is something that you're hiding. So if a journal requests you for your raw data, it's in your interest to submit it to them.
Thank you very much, Prof. Jaoko. There is an anonymous attendee who is asking, if I teach and share intraoperative photos to aid in understanding, is it ethically acceptable, or should consent be obtained? So intraop, take pictures and share now, yeah, perhaps with the students and maybe in the open space, Prof. Jaoko and Constance.
Intraoperable. What is the
Yes.
interoperable?
Intraoperative. So somebody perhaps is undergoing abdominal surgery.
Yes. Oh, okay.
The surgeon is taking photos.
Yeah, that doesn't fall under research, but it falls under medical ethics. Yeah, you cannot do that. You need to get consent from the person, and you need to anonymize it. I've actually seen this before. Even doctors are not aware of this. I see doctors post procedures that they have done, even in WhatsApp groups of medical doctors, and you think that is fine. It's actually not fine. I think this is an important topic, because the thinking for many doctors is that as long as I'm sharing this information with other doctors, then that is fine. But that is not true. Actually, there was a case in South Africa where that went to court, and somebody was found liable, where a doctor during a cough was playing golf with a colleague and discussed a patient who is not his patient. And the person got to know about it, and they actually found liable. So this idea that because I'm sharing it with a doctor is fine, that is wrong. It should be a doctor who is also managing you, who is your doctor, who has a duty to care. But you cannot just share it with any other doctor or any other person. You need to get consent from that patient.
Prof, if I may interject there to add on to what you've just said, not just any consent. Please make sure it's written. This is where the legal aspect steps in. Please make sure it's written, lest this person later on comes and denies that they gave you consent. So it becomes a he said, she said story. But if it is in writing, then you have proof. You can actually say on this data, from this form, clearly, you gave me the consent, and make sure that you clearly indicate how you're going to use the pictures you've taken. it can't be a blanket consent. So if you're going to use them, say, for teaching purposes, it needs to be clearly stated therein. And you could develop a template, a general one that you can very easily use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yudia Muthui has congratulated the two panelists for the good work. There is a question: if biological material leaves the country for further testing because they may not have adequate infrastructure, local infrastructure, how do you ensure the material is returned to the country, not leaving material out there? It's a big concern.
Yeah, so this is what you call, this falls under what you call material transfer agreement. And not all specimens need to come back, you know, but you need to describe what is going to happen to that material. And so the research participants give their consent for that. So there's some material that you'll send and you say, after the tests have been done, they have to be destroyed. There are some that you'll say they'll be stored for 5 years or 3 years, whatever. But that is specified in the material transfer agreement. The issue as to who ensures, or whatever you have put in the material transfer agreement, who ensures that it is complied with, that is another level of discussion, because science is based on trust. So researchers are supposed to be people of integrity. So if you sign a material transfer agreement and we say that me as the person shipping the material, we have agreed with you, the person receiving the material, that after this test, it is going to be destroyed. There is nobody to police that. There is no international body or whatever that will be able to police that. So we totally rely on trust. And if researchers are not trustworthy, even the work that they produced is not trustworthy. When researchers say that they recruited 3,000 people, they collected 5 milliliters of blood from them, they took their temperatures, we trust that. So if you start doubting, then it's problematic to science. And so therefore the researchers receiving the specimen, we trust that they'll do what they say they're going to do with it.
Okay. Thank you. Somebody is asking, when there are queries with regard to perhaps the ethical and legal issues raised in the discussion this afternoon, how does NACOSTI, the National Research Fund, work with the Office of the Data Protection Authority? Is there a hierarchy of raising issues, and who are the stakeholders? Any insights?
Yes, on that particular question, actually, one of the challenges that the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner is facing is enough of these issues, they are also finding themselves in it. The office is still, how do I say, they're still learning the ropes on some of these things. So, and that is why, I know this for a fact, they're actually encouraging, if you have an issue, talk to them. Something you're not sure about, talk to them, because they're also in the process of learning. This issue of data protection was not keenly being followed previously in the country until the law was enacted, and there has been some amendments to it. So if I would not say that there is a hierarchy, strictly speaking, what I would tell you to do is look and see, is there an issue? Are you dealing with personal data? Are you dealing with sensitive data? Then see what the Data Protection Act requires of you, right? And in some of these things, they have even realized the nascent nature of the law, that they have allowed, for example, if you have a data protection officer, that person can be shared across institutions because they've realized this is something upcoming. So the first thing I would say is that institutions need to have a data protection officer, because that is the person now who will potentially identify what are the data protection issues and therefore engage with the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner to see the way forward. Because even if the law may be saying do this, there are challenges maybe of implementing what is being said. And so they will give you guidance. NACOSTI may directly not be dealing, NACOSTI is dealing with the issue of data protection indirectly through the ethics review committees, because they are the ones now who are expected to look at issues of the proposal presented for ethical clearance. How is it addressing the issue of data management? So that if there are issues, it tells the person you need to address this is an issue. We can't give you ethical clearance from here. So I would say the NACOSTI is not directly dealing with the issue. They are dealing with it indirectly through the ethics clearance, because it is only after you get ethics clearance that you're supposed to proceed to present your proposal to get NACOSTI clearance or permit.
Thank you very much. Some are asking about how to source for funders, for funders, which funders are good and helpful for research. I think that we'll try and respond to it online. Now, what somebody is asking, now there are many stakeholders. Won't this cause researchers to get fatigued? And I think he's referring to financial fatigue, since there may be fees to be paid at many of the levels. Are there any financial implications, Prof. Jauko?
No,
Dr.
there
Gitonio?
isn't. No,
Yes,
there isn't
so far.
thing that you pay for open science. There is no requirement for you to pay anything. Actually, that would even be going against the principle of open science. Open science is trying to encourage data and research across the board. So not having money should not be an excuse. And that's what open science is all about. So you don't pay any fee for open science.
Okay. Constance, somebody's asking, are there any cases of jailing as a result of violation in research, these research regulations? Have you come across any, at least in Kenya?
No, I'm not aware of any, but I do know, for example, there was it a KU or JKU case where somebody plagiarized an entire dissertation of a Nigerian, something to do with the office of the First Lady. And actually, JKU or KU, I can't remember which of the two institutions, actually withdrew the research and actually even withdrew the certification that they had given that person. So that is, an implication. There are instances where it could even lead to you losing your job. So I'm not aware of a legal case for ethical issues. But if it is a legal issue, there is a problem, because the Data Protection Act does provide for legal offenses, which you can be taken to court for. For example, if you mishandle sensitive data, there are repercussions to that, which include either jail term or paying a fine or both. So even as an institution, you have to be very careful how you handle the personal and the sensitive data of the people in your institution because of those legal repercussions. But I'm not aware of an actual case.
Okay, thank you. There is a participant who is asking, what is your view on the observer effect on the outcome of research process? What are the implications of open science and subjective interpretation of the raw data shared on the possibility of science no longer being regarded as objectively unquestionable? That's a long one. I don't know whether you got it. I think that one you'll have to read, Prof. Jauko, and just read it.
Yeah, I get the gist, and I've already alluded to it with the COVID-19 example, where the person is asking. So, for example, if you publish a preliminary data in preprints, and later there is something that is not correct about it, would people start losing trust in open science? And so that is one of the dangers. So remember, we said that open science does not mean that you should avoid the rigors of research that is peer reviewed and ensuring that it's to the high standard. The So preprint publications is not a requirement for open science. This happened during COVID, where there was an urgency to get the data out there quickly so that people could make decisions quickly. But it's not a requirement for open science. So I would say that open science will not in any way degrade science if we still go through the rigors of peer review.
Thank you. So there are two questions which are touching on AI innovations and the ethical and legal aspects of open science. Now, AI is another big animal which I think will require a webinar in itself to consider the ethical and legal aspects of it. And I think our time is up. The questions are still a few questions on how you can choose trustworthy open access journals and avoid predatory ones. I think that is, another aspect. Can one be thinking you're dealing with an open access journal and yet it is a predatory journal because the layers have now been removed?
Yeah, that's of course that is an area of concern. But there are two different issues. The predatory journals and genuine journals. You just need to know how to distinguish predatory journals from regular journals, and it's a whole story. So one of those is just looking at the, who is the owner of the of the journal? Is it associated to a research institution? Is it associated to a university? Who are the editors? What are the qualifications of the reviewers of the editorial board, which is usually published on the website of the journal? What is the process of accepting a journal, an article for publication? That is also put in their website, that it will be received, it will be taken to 3 reviewers, whatever process that will be followed. Any journal that you submit your article and then they're also charging exorbitantly and giving you a quick turnaround time of, within 2 days, they already tell you that the article has been accepted for publication. So there are telltale signs of distinguishing between the predatory journals and the genuine journals. There's a person who used to do that. Maybe some of you remember a guy called Bells, and there's something called Bell's List. He did all that for people, but he was sued by some journals who, and as a result, he stopped doing it. So Bell's List is not updated. I think it's up to 2022 or 2021. But whatever Bells was doing to determine predatory journals, you can do it yourself.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. So participants.
Sorry,
yes,
can I just add to what Prof. Jaoko has said? There's a website called Think, Check, Submit. Think, Check, Submit. That one will help you to avoid predatory journals. They can use that one.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to ask my two panelists to give their parting shots with regard to these issues, and I'll go ladies first.
Thank you. Mine is to say that open science is something that is good. However, it must be done properly so as to ensure that it indeed does bring out the benefits that were thought of in encouraging the concept of open science. And in so doing, it means that in some places, the law has to come in to assist us and protect us in doing the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Prof. Jaoko, what would be your parting shot?
Yeah, so open science is the way to go. We cannot avoid it. I think science is heading that way. We just need to be cautious of some of the risks of doing it. And the idea of knowing what the risks are with regard to ethics is for us to be conscious and to address them. But open science is the way to go.
So thank you very, very much, Dr. Gikonyo and Professor Jaoko, for very ably handling this important issue. I wish to thank the Department of Research at the Kenyatta National Hospital for availing this platform as a national platform for continuing learning. And that is the end of our webinar today. Thank you once again, and goodbye. Back to you, the KNH research team. KNH research team, or do we close?
Okay, thank you. Yes, yes, we can close. But to our participants, the upcoming sessions which have been now projected on the screen, kindly take note of the dates, and we will be sending you reminders through email for these sessions. Thank you once again to our participants and to the Prof. Amayo, Prof. Jaoko, and Dr. Gikonyo for this wonderful and engaging presentation. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you and good afternoon.
Goodbye all.